Hell, or El Infierno is one of my all-time favorite movies. It's compiled of action, comedy, and a bit of drama. It shows what the absence of money can and will do to people. The movie has dark truths and comedic undertones. It's both sad and funny. This is Benny. Benny was in the US for 20 years and ended up being deported. On his way back home, he's robbed. Once by a random man, then a few hours later, some impeach take what he had left. I mean, all countries have crime and corruption, but we clearly see where he fled from and how different life could be in Mexico. When Benny finally sees his mom after 20 years, she looks almost confused, then quickly pushes him away a couple seconds later. When he left, he promised his mom and younger brother he would help through dollars, but he never sent a cent. His father also left for the US a long time ago and never contacted them again. Benny finds out his younger brother was killed and he's filled with instant regret. His mom tells him if he had kept his promise, his brother would still be alive right now. Benny's godfather owns a tire shop, so he goes to try to get work. But on his way there, he sees how much everything in his hometown has changed. There's machine guns heard and a dead man in the street. The sign that has the name of the town has been tagged up with graffiti, changing the name from Arcangel to Narcangel. His hometown is now run by narcos. And Benny stops at a store and asks an old lady he once knew about his godfather's shop. Then he asks about his old friend, her son. At first, she doesn't recognize him, but when she does, she immediately tells him Benny's younger brother, El Diablo, killed her son. When Benny gets to his godfather, he catches up a little. Benny doesn't understand how things are worse now compared to when he left. His godfather explains what happened to his brother and the life he lived. Everyone knew his brother, everyone feared El Diablo, or the devil. Until one day El Diablo was found dead. He was shot 60 times, so you can imagine whoever did it wasn't messing around. Benny didn't contact his family for 20 years and had no idea what his brother was into, or how his hometown had changed. Every time he comes in contact with someone he once knew, you can see the shock in his face. Now Benny's on a mission to find out what happened to his brother. His uncle tells him his brother had a relationship with a woman and tells him where to find her. She works at a bar and seems to be a waitress / sex worker. Although Benny came from poverty, he never really witnessed crime or gun violence. As he introduces himself to his sister-in-law Lupe, a random man in the bar threatens Benny for speaking to his woman. You can tell Benny has never felt the fear of having a pistol aimed at his face, but it's the first time for everything. Benny leaves right away, but Lupe comes out and gives him her address. He shows up at her house later in the day and the young man opens the door. He basically asks Benny, "What the fuck do you need?" in an aggressive tone and assumes Benny's there to pay for Lupe's services. Benny is once again shot. He explains that he's Lupe's brother-in-law and finds out that young man is his nephew, El Diablo's son, and he's named Benjamin after Benny himself. Benjamin is a tough boy. He's only 14, but he acts older. Loves his father and the fame he carried. He wants to be just like him. Lupe gets home and has a short discussion with Benny before smacking him and kicking him out. She told him about his brother and how he was a bad influence on her son Benjamin, but he brings up how her work isn't a good example either. I understand what he's saying, but it's like the mom said, if he kept his promise and helped his family, then maybe his brother would have took a different path. The next day, Benny goes to work for his godfather when a pickup truck pulls up. A man in expensive clothes and a gun on his hip jumps out. He's El Benny's old friend. They're happy to see each other till Benny calls his old friend Gordo, or Fat, an old nickname. His old friend pulls a gun out on Benny and tells him he's no longer El Gordo. He's now known as El Cochi Loco. Benny apologizes and trembles in fear till Cochi laughs and tells Benny he's just joking. He hugs Benny and tells his henchman that Benny's like a brother. Anybody touches Benny, they'll have to deal with him. One of those men threatened Benny at the bar, and now he has to apologize. Benny leaves word to have a drink with El Cochi and catch up. Now at this point, we've seen Benny's lonely mother. We learned of his dead narco brother, his aspiring nephew, and now his old friend who happens to be one of the big dogs. He left a life that is no longer around and spent so much time in the US that he had a hard time accepting how the absence of money changed everything around him. At the bar, Benny has some beers with El Cochi. Growing up, Benny and El Cochi became friends because Cochi would defend them from El Orejas, a bigger kid that would try to beat on Benny. Benny wonders what happened to El Orejas, and he's told that like many others who weren't able to leave the US, he ended up in a business and he was killed conducting it. When Benny asks El Cochi about his brother, El Diablo, everyone at the table is visibly uncomfortable. Cochi tells him that El Diablo worked for Don Reyes, like everyone else. But a rival narco, Don Jaime, was fighting Reyes for territory and El Diablo ended up dead. El Cochi raises his beard to toast El Diablo and says how he was a real badass. El Cochi asks Benny what his plans are and flaunts his money. He tells Benny there's no point in returning to the US where he'll be humiliated by Americans, when there's money to be made here in his hometown. This is all thought-provoking. I mean, here you have Benny's uncle, a humble man who works every day and barely makes a living. Then you see Cochi. The man grew up in poverty and now he walks around with hella money. He's respected, or better yet feared, and known by all. El Cochi sees some steps in life as inevitable. Either he tried to live a normal way and stayed poor for the rest of his life, or he went the other route and took what he thought he was owed by force. When Benny goes back to work with his uncle, he's told about Los Reyes del Norte, or Kings of the North. Don Jose is the leader and controls most of the business around. He runs drugs, kidnapping, prostitution, and contraband. He's also protected by the local and state government. Don Jose and Don Pancho are both narcos, and they are at war because Don Jose named his son next in line, and Pancho didn't like that. Benny's uncle sits next to him and tells him that whatever he does, he needs to stay away from that life, even if all he has is his humble job at the tire shop. Later, Benny visits Lupe and despicably kisses her. She denies him for a second before accepting his riz. And at the very moment they're doing it, Benjamin catches them in the act. Benny ends up having sex with Lupe. The next day, Benny's at work when a truck pulls up and Lupe hops out. She lets him know Benjamin got into trouble and he's being held at the police station. Lupe has work and she needs Benny to go pay her son's bail while she's out getting piped out her son. The corrupt cops want 50,000 pesos for his release. Benny has no choice but to go to El Cochi for help. Cochi is that guy and he pulls out a stack of dollars like it's nothing. This might not seem like much, but in Mexico, only people carrying dollars are tourists and narcos, especially that quantity. El Cochi has lots of money and he flaunts it every time he gets a chance. Now, Benny's in debt. El Cochi takes him to meet El Patron, the boss. Benny now needs to work for that man. Don Jose is very well connected. There's pictures in his office of his political affiliations, and he speaks on his hate for Americans and how they look down on Mexicans, but the U.S. forced countries like Mexico to operate the way they do. Don Jose gives Benny a job and money up front, tells him he's to protect Don Jose's son at all costs. He also warns him about temptation. He's not to put any drugs they sell in his body. He says putting drugs in your body is a mortal sin. Benny's first day on the job consists of dropping all drugs.
¿Qué le vamos a dejar a un men?
Dame 20 grapas. Un cuartito de mota, sin tachas, paquete de chivas, 12 piedritas y unas 200 metas que ya ves que están de moda, ¿no?
Paying off cops. El Cochi gives him some money that belongs to Don Jose, but Cochi tells him that money is nothing to a man like Don Jose, and it's okay to skim a little bit off the top. They then go to a strip club and Benny gets a prostitute. His time's cut short when El Cochi tells him they have to leave immediately. On Benny's first night on the job, he's given a task. He and El Cochi are to hunt down a man who owes money named La Cucaracha. They pull up on the guy who gives them the location. The snitch is the victim's brother, and he rats him out for a few dollars. Cochi has history with La Cucaracha, so he agrees to let him say goodbye to his family. On the way to the truck, El Cochi gives La Cucaracha an opportunity to kill the man who ratted on him. You can tell from El Cochi's first interaction with the brother, he hates snitches. They find the rat and La Cucaracha shoots him in the middle of the street. La Cucaracha begs to be shot, but El Cochi has been tasked with bringing him in alive. Don Jose interrogates La Cucaracha and wants to know what he told the feds. He tells him he better hope he didn't say much because if he did, he's going after La Cucaracha's kids. Benny looks visibly uncomfortable and upset at this point. It's his first time seeing a man tied up and beat. Benny holds La Cucaracha's head while Don Jose cuts his tongue out. He then uses a chainsaw to cut off his hands and proceeds to shoot him in the head. Benny passes out and hits the ground. We see him in his home, distraught, breathing hard and shaking. The whole day was good, easy work, lots of money. But watching a man get tortured and then killed is something that seems to be way too much for Benny to handle. It's looking like Benny isn't built for this life, but for the next few minutes we get a lot of cutscenes showing Benny's transformation from the man who passed out at the sight of death to the man who does the killing and even dissolves people in barrels of acid. One of my favorite scenes in this movie is the part in which Benny and El Cochi get their pistols blessed by a priest, a padre, and they pay him right after. It shines light on the hypocrisy of both the pair and the priest, and once again shows us what money makes people do, and how it justifies just about anything. El Cochi meets up with a weed plug that brings him a bunch of bricks, and that man shows up with a young boy. It looks like maybe he's training him, to take over one day. Whatever he's doing, we see how even a boy younger than Benjamin might be inspired or forced to live the life of the narco. After the deal, El Cochi and Benny came across a police roadblock. It happens to be the same cop that extorted Benny and takes bribes from El Cochi. He tells him that the road is blocked and they need to take a detour. El Cochi hesitates, seeing as he pays the cops enough money on the regular, but he gives in and takes the detour. Once they hit the dirt road, they're ambushed by what I assume are rival narcos, and they have a shootout. El Cochi is able to kill most of them, but one of the enemies gets away injured. Benny's told to chase him down. When Benny catches up to him, the man begs for his life. For a second, Benny wants to forgive him, but then the man reaches for a gun and Benny puts a bullet right through his head. Once Benny and El Coche get back and meet up with Don Jose, they're praised. He gives them both a stack of cash and sends them on their way. Don Jose explains how they were ambushed by his brother and rival. In the back, he has two bodies. They're his nephews. He plans to send them to his brother. Benny finally visits his mom in a new truck, new clothes, and a new personality. He gives her a TV and some money. She's obviously happy to see him, but can't help but notice he's following his brother's footsteps. It's hilarious how she both berates him and then asks him for his watch and a Walkman because her neighbor's son brought her a Walkman from the US. She both shames him and encourages him at the same time, just like the priest. Benny picks up his new family, or brother's family, and takes them to the cemetery. They visit El Diablo's gravesite and he shows them how he built his brother a sort of memorial. He also had a corrido, Mexican ballad, made for El Diablo. I find this nice and disrespectful because not only is he betting his wife, but he's standing in front of his dead brother with her and his nephew, acting if they're just some happy family visiting a family member's gravesite. I mean, that shit is crazy. When Benny is tucking Benjamin in, Benjamin asks Benny for a favor. He wants to know if Benny will build him a memorial just like his dad's and make him a corrido just like his dad's when he dies, before Benny dies. Benny tells Benjamin he can't take the same path, but we're once again reminded of the person Benjamin wants to be and how he admires people like his uncle and his father. Benny finds out the man Lupe is working for beat her and disrespected her. Benny isn't someone to be played with anymore. He isn't afraid of hurt and kill, and he makes his way to the bar. Benny and El Coche beat the man down, tie him up, and then burn him alive. After this, the cop that set Benny and El Coche up is caught sleeping on the job. They beat him up and question him. He tells them he was paid 6,000 pesos, or around $600. El Coche feels disrespected by the low amount put on him, and he puts a bullet in the cop's head. As Benny digs up a hole for the body, he asks El Coche if he feels anything when he kills. He wonders if El Coche fears hell. We finally get to the reason why this movie is named Hell. Benny fears being sent there after death. Coche has a different point of view. He tells Benny hell is right here. He recalls their childhood, how they starved, how they were cold, how they lived in misery, how even today people like him are killing each other without a second thought, just for money, just because they don't have any opportunities or a decent way to live. He believes life is hell and he's already in it. Maybe he's just a man finding excuses for his actions. Maybe he's lying to himself. But I can't help but respect his opinion. He grew up with nothing and he was going to win in life, even if it meant a horrible death or being responsible for horrible deaths. Humans are animals, and when you put an animal in a corner, there's only one way out. El Coche takes Benny to his home and introduces him to his wife and 5 kids. They have a beer and discuss Coche's 2 personalities. Benny thinks he's a different person at home, and he's right. El Coche says that is that and this is this. Benny and El Coche are in the process of moving the body out of a building when they're ambushed by some cops. El Coche is caught by surprise. He doesn't understand why the cop he's paying is holding him at gunpoint. They, along with 2 of Coche's men, are taken into custody. It turns out the cop wants to look good for a federal agent, and he brought them in just to look like he's doing a good job. But the agent isn't fooled. He doesn't care about them. He wants the big fish. Right after this scene, the men are freed and stand in front of Don Jose. Don Jose presses the government official he's bribing and the cop that locked his people up. Once he disciplines the cop and the official, he sends them away and confronts his people. He asks who killed the cop. Everyone present denies killing the cop, even though the killers were Benny and El Coche. When Benny gets home, he sees Lupe on Benjamin's bed upset. He hasn't been home and she's worried, so Benny goes out to find them. Word on the street is Benjamin runs with some small town dealers and has been making good money. When Benny finds him, Benjamin refuses to go at first, but agrees eventually. Benny is sent out to get some old money with a guy they call the sergeant, ex-military. The sergeant goes in, gets the money, and he's out in less than a minute, paid in full. When Benny asks how he did it, the sergeant puts a couple of fingers and an ear in Benny's lap. Benny gets a call from El Coche and it's urgent. When they arrive, there's a blown up truck outside the restaurant and everything is shot up. Benny finds El Coche injured inside, and Coche tells him that Los Panchos ambushed them while they were eating. It's revealed that JR, Don Jose's son, was killed in the shootout. He's found butt naked in a bed with another man. Don Jose cries and screams and blames the crew. He wants to go after Los Panchos with everything he has. He then shoots the cop that had previously arrested his crew dead and sends everyone home, but he seems to mostly blame El Coche. They have a funeral for Don Jose's son. When El Coche gets home, he sees his son dead in the front yard. He sobs and hugs his lifeless son. There's a sign on the door that says, "Just like that, son for son, tooth for tooth." El Coche vows to get justice. Benny wants to help, but El Coche says it's his own issue. Then repeats what he said before. Life itself is hell, Benny. The scene cuts and we see a funeral. El Coche Loco and his son are buried right next to each other. I know Cochi was a bad man, but the movie still makes you feel sorry for both him and his son. He was blamed for something someone else did, and his innocent son paid the price. Don Jose meets the crew and offers $100,000 for every head of the people who are responsible for his son's death. They go hunting and kill several panchos and question most of them. When they interrogate the last one, he says the person responsible for giving the location of JR is a youngin by the name of El Diablito, which is El Diablo's son. Benny denies knowing anyone with that nickname, and so does his boy. After this, they go to a cockfight and kill a bunch of armed men. When they have Don Pancho on their sides, they deliver Don Jose's message. They turn the bag upside down and Pancho's son's heads roll onto the ground. As he reaches for his gun, the crew lights his ass up. When Benny finally makes it home, he asks Benjamin or El Diablito if he snitched. When pressed, El Diablito confesses, but he says it was for a reason. He says Don Jose and his son JR killed his father. Now Benny has to get to the bottom of it. Benny pulls up to Huasteco, one of El Cochi's men, and presses him for info on his brother's death. He admits that Don Jose had El Diablo killed, and instead of cutting off his tongue like he did with La Cucaracha, he cut El Diablo's balls off because he had sex with Don Jose's wife multiple times. Huasteco slips up and calls El Diablo's son El Diablito, so Benny has to tie him up for the time being. He picks up Benjamin and takes him to a bus station to leave the country. On the way, he's pulled over by a cop and has no option but to shoot him in the middle of the road. He drops El Diablito off and makes his way to the police station. Once there, he speaks to the government agent that questioned him earlier, starts talking. He tells him about the multiple crimes in the night they killed and decapitated 8 of Pancho's sons. Benny thinks he's safe, but the agent calls Don Jose. He was a dirty agent the whole time, working for both sides. Benny is tied up and has a bag over his head. They beat him and they ask him where El Diablito is. Then, they put him in the back of a truck and drive him to where he's to be killed. But Benny has a plan. He finds out that they're only going to make 5,000 pesos off him. He offers them $50,000 and a kilo of pure cocaine for his release. So the guys take him up on the offer and he leads them to his brother's gravesite where he has stashed his funds. Although they agree to $50K, they take everything and shoot his ass twice. They leave him for dead in an unmarked grave under a pile of rocks, but Benny survives and climbs out of it in the morning. He stumbles into town and makes it to his godfather's tire shop. His godfather gives him a ride home and Benny is desperate to find Lupe. When he finally does, he's happy. She looks fine. He goes to kiss her on the forehead, but she's been decapitated. Benny is both injured and depressed. Benny says goodbye to his mother and his godfather. He tells her it's probably the last time she'll ever see him again. He goes to a rally looking for revenge and sneaks through the crowd. Once he gets to the front, he pulls an AK-47 out and starts airing that shit out. Don Jose grabs his wife and stands behind her while Benny's shooting everything in sight. The guards, the wife, the priest, and lastly, Don Jose. Now after this, we see Benny buried next to his brother and Lupe. But in the extended version of the movie, Benny is seen at the burial site saying goodbye to his brother and Lupe. Just then, a young man walks up to him and asks for a cigarette. He says he's Pancho's grandson and he kills Benny. This is the same team that was hanging with El Diablito on the railroad and that put a gun on Benny when Benny tried to take El Diablito home. Benny is buried next to his brother and Lupe. Now, although El Diablito went to Phoenix, he is now back in town and he pays his respects at their grave. He jumps in a truck and heads to a narco safe house. There, he finds Pancho's grandkids, which happens to be the same teenager that killed Benny. He pulls an AK-47 out and kills everybody there. And this is how this movie ends. This movie has its ups, its downs, its laughs, and its cries. It's an overall well-rounded piece of cinema. If you like both action and comedy, it's worth the watch because I feel like I didn't do it justice with my commentary. If you made it to the end of this video, I would appreciate it if you gave me a subscribe and a like and maybe something in the comments. Thank you for your time.